Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. I know you were worried that Brian wasn't going to be back, and we were worried about that too. We were so stressed out about it, but here he is. He's back again. Thank you for coming, traveling all this way to your office.
Glad to be here.
Be a part of this episode. Yeah. Today, one of the things we've been discussing as a staff is how do we talk about things in the life of our church? Things that come up and things that happen. One of the things that's beautiful about us is that we're an intergenerational church, which means that we don't just have multiple generations, but they intersect with each other. They do life with each other, and they matter. One of the beauties and sadnesses of being an intergenerational church is also that means that we have people closer to the end of their life. And what that often means is that throughout the life of our church, we lose people that we love and that matter to us and they're close to us. And not only do we have that, we also have the tie-in of everything that seems to be happening in the world right now with the war in Iran, with young men and women here, family members, children of people here being sent off. And what often comes with all of that is a word we don't like to talk about, sometimes be seen as a negative word, but is grief.
Yeah.
And even it says in the scriptures that Christ was stricken with grief almost until death.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we've kind of been talking about is the challenge that most people try to take on is how do I avoid grief? And avoidance actually doesn't keep it from coming. It actually just keeps us from facing grief. And so we kind of wanted today to talk a little bit about the realities of what is grief and how do we understand it, and then how do we deal with it and kind of process through that. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I do think this is an important topic. In fact, just for transparency's sake, when we were talking about what podcast we were going to do, for some reason, this has just been on my heart a lot lately. And so the issue of grief is something I think it's important that we kind of shine a spotlight on and talk about. And grief is common to every human being. I think sometimes when we are going through grief or trying to avoid grief, we kind of feel like, for some reason, when you're in that, you feel like you're the only person in it. When honestly, grief is in some form or fashion, is an ongoing part of life, because the longer we live, the longer life is filled with losses, whether that's the loss of people, whether it's the loss of the way things were that I treasured or enjoyed. And we see a lot of that in our time because things change so rapidly. I mean, you get used to one way of things and then it changes. So there's grief with that. And I think it's a very healthy conversation to bring up. How do we deal with that reality, that emotion, all that comes with grief?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's there's sometimes you can almost get, and not in a negative way, when my brain goes to even the thought of often when you go to a funeral and you hear the message at a funeral, in a good way, the message is don't be sad, be happy that your loved ones have moved on. But what that can sometimes be distributed as is that to lament is seen as a negative thing, that we should never allow ourselves time to process or lament how we're feeling about things. And actually, lament is a biblical practice.
Right.
To spend time working through, both of us carry the history of divorce, and that being a part of our testimonies. And one of the things I tried to do was just look forward. Just look forward and not spend time in lament and grief about my aspects of what felt like failure.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, we can't escape grief, and grief doesn't even just come for a moment and then we go, okay, that was done, I'll put that over there. It often comes in waves and sections, emotions. This is probably terrible, but there are things I'm already beginning to think about as my parents get older that I do with my dad or with my mom that I know I won't be able to do the same when they're gone because I'll think about that. And so the grief will go away. And then when I go do this, it will pop back up and I can't avoid it. I have to be able to go, here this is, give it to the Lord and walk through how to process it, with him and how to live with that and how to be able to think about it in some ways.
Yeah. So you're bringing up a good point that lamenting is biblical. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the first ways we enter into a healthy grief is, and people, I do want to acknowledge people grieve differently. It's not that everybody has to grieve in the same way,
No.
but we have to give expression that brings that grief from the inside out. It's like if we just try to, I can remember you were talking about divorce. I can remember in that season of my life when, I would see a picture of my family together and just the sight of that, and I can remember that wave you're talking about of grief coming over me and wanting just to fight it so hard, like not to let the tears be shed or not to tell, a close friend about how that made me feel, or that's the worst thing we can do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the absolute worst because we need to allow that wave of grief to be expressed in a healthy way.
Yeah.
The more, and I'll say this, the more we bottle up grief, the more destruction it does on the inside, the interior of our soul, and the more it becomes unhealthy how that processes on the outside.
Yes.
Really, sometimes we can really be dealing with grief and it comes out as anger at other people or just ways that it is expressed that's not healthy.
Yeah. Well, and like even, which is odd to think about, but like neuroscience has shown that bottled grief can actually lead to like physical sickness.
Yes.
So it can actually make our bodies sick. It can make us produce tumors. It can make us chronically ill. A lot of people go through and there's some weird versions of this, but there is forms of inner healing where we process our grief, and people have come out of chronic illness through processing their grief well. Mm-hmm. And I think to live a life where we believe that sadness won't be a part of it is just not a reality. And it's not, it's not that sadness won't come, but allowing ourselves to be sad to get through it. Because you're right. Like I had to have days where I cried, where I was sad, where I let myself feel those things because on the other side, I felt better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You actually somehow heal. It's honestly very similar to the process of confession, where confession leads to spiritual freedom. Mm-hmm. And actually holding in the sins I've had is the thing that keeps me in bondage. Grief almost operates in the same way.
Right. Yeah, and I can imagine the person who is listening to this and they're thinking, well, I really don't have anybody that I can talk to or express it to. And here's where I want to go in the spiritual direction with it is that we all do because Jesus is with us. And one of the healthiest things that I've learned in my own spiritual journey is to invite Jesus into that emotion, to invite Jesus into that sadness and express to him that feeling of sadness. I mean, if there's one book that is just the description and poster of what this looks like, it's the book of Psalms. I mean, David's expression there of really, I mean, the messiness of life.
It's a book of lament almost.
You just look through it and you see reality and you see him not only expressing it, but sharing his life, sharing his grief with the Lord and inviting the Lord into that. And, you talk about how that leads to healing. It's interesting in that almost every psalm that is of a lament nature, at the end of it's always hopeful.
Yeah. Yep.
It's like it goes from great depths of grief and loss to but yet my hope is in the Lord.
Yes.
And there's hope.
Yeah, there's something waiting on the other side. And I think too, there's big grief and then there's little grief. Like just from a personal perspective, I've had to see someone. I've struggled. It sounds insane, I know, but I've had a real struggle with a form of like clinical depression that comes from nostalgia. And so I can enter into states of depression based off change. And so when things have, like it's, when I think about, I joke now, I try to tell my wife about like growing up on Battlefield Parkway in Fort Oglethorpe, there was Kmart, a couple restaurants, Woods, and then Walmart.
Yeah.
And now the whole thing is one thing after another. And, it brings change in how we live and like, moving from like renting movies to streaming and all these things. I actually suffer from a bit of like depression from wanting a life that used to be that's not available anymore. And so like grief even hits us in weird ways where that produces in me a sense of where I have to grieve.
Yeah.
Because grief is the ability to grieve something that has happened or will happen. And like you have to actively process that, because without that, it's just a bottled up thing that just sits on your shoulders for eternity. And I think you're right. Like the goal hopefully here at the River is even to create a community where people can find people to grieve with.
Yeah.
To find space to do life with people where we can say, hey, I need someone to walk with me through this. And, the encouragement is like, that's a form of bravery, not a form of weakness.
Right.
Yeah,
I think the most beautiful thing in the world would be that our life groups, our disciple-making groups could be places where people not only celebrate the good things in life and share the good things in life, but also walk through the depth of grief together, and not to fix it, but to share it, to pray about it, and encourage one another.
Yeah.
And this message kind of personal to me. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last several weeks. I heard Kerry Newhoff say something on his podcast, and I think he was quoting someone else, but he said ministry can be defined as one long series of ungrieved losses.
Yeah. That's
because
good.
in ministry, you're constantly moving on to the next thing. It's like, okay, we did that. We had that funeral. Now we've got to think about Easter.
Yeah.
And it's like you never really
grieve
grieve that loss or the changes that come along in ministry. I remember one year, 3 or 4 years ago, I had, I think it was 25 funerals in 1 year.
Oh.
And it was just I think maybe I tried to pretend that it was just normal, but just the weight of that to walk around with is just like death upon death upon death. And so, talking about these things, I think about it from a personal standpoint, just how important it is that we don't, like you said earlier, just look forward and not assess and reflect and lament and invite the Lord's healing into whatever that is that we've lost.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think even, grief, weakness, and these senses and emotions are great indicators of the need of the Holy Spirit and the work of Christ on the cross. And it gives us, I think grief even gives us an invitation into the presence of God in a way we couldn't have without it.
Yeah.
It allows us to have the Comforter and the, the Prince of Peace to come in and work through us. But if we don't give it up to him, if we don't offer grief out, there's no place for the Holy Spirit to come in and touch those places. And if you hold it all in, that's so much death to see over a small amount of time. If you just go, no, it's fine. Like one of the things I'm trying to even get better about for myself is when someone says, how you doing? I just don't go, I'm good. Mm-hmm. If I'm not.
Right.
We do that. We lie. How's everything going? I'm good. I'm doing well. And deep inside, I'm like, help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm suffering.
Or I wish I could tell you what I'm really going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something along those lines. Because I think if we paint a smile over ourselves and walk through life, we're going to be disappointed at the amount of freedom we could have had.
Yeah.
In how we live and enjoy our lives.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this, these types of conversations are encouraging. One of the things we want to try to do, like I said at the beginning, is there are just aspects of existing that happen in Christian community, and we have to have a space to talk about them and to be able to have conversations. So we're going to continue to touch on different topics like this throughout our podcast as we just come across things in our church life and what happens in our community that we feel like maybe require more dialogue and space to have communication. I'd also say, if you're struggling with some grief or some things that have been unprocessed that you're looking help for, we'd love to help you with that. You can contact our office or contact our space. We offer pastoral care. We have disciple-making groups. We have life groups. We have people who do life well with other people. And so, one of the beautiful things about Acts 2:42-47 is it says they had all things in common, which also means they carry everyone's burdens together.
Yeah.
And Paul mentions that, carry each other's burdens. And so we want to create space for that as a community and as a church family. Yeah. And so if that's something you're going through, we'd love to help however we can. We hope this was helpful for you and a blessing to you. And we hope that this helps you maybe be able to process something which you haven't been able to in the past. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week.